Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us at this evening's Green Soapbox presentation. So great to see so many people here. So I am going to get things started here. All right. Oh, okay, here we go. Thank you everybody for joining us. So great to have you all here. My name is Patrick Murphy. I am the lead for development and communications here at Delta Institute. And we are here presenting tonight's Green Soapbox, our annual event. This year's theme is focused on city resilience. In my role as lead, I am also the staff liaison to the Delta Emerging Leaders Associate Board. They are the ones who are responsible for organizing and planning all of this evening. So big shout out to all of our Dells. That's what we call them for short. I'm going to be kicking things off this evening by first sharing a little bit about who Delta is, some opportunities to engage with us, and a few housekeeping rules. So first of all, who is Delta? Well, we are a nonprofit that works with communities throughout the Midwest to solve complex environmental challenges. We have had this mission and vision since our founding in 1998. I would encourage you all to learn more about the work that we do by visiting our website, the same website you visited when you registered for tonight. That is delta-institute.org. I'm going to be recommending that for a few minutes now, so bear with me with that. There's a lot of great tools and publications, resources that are available for you to download, watch, all kinds of great things. So be sure to give that website a view. Some of the programs that you will find are nature-based climate solutions. This is one of our programs that is focused on partnering with municipalities to implement and plan for green infrastructure and other natural solutions to help them manage their stormwater and ultimately capture 100 million stormwater gallons over the next few years, while also leveraging up to $100 million in municipal investments. In addition to that, we also have a resilient agriculture program in which we are supporting 1,000 farmers as they transition 1 million acres of Midwest farmland to adopt more climate smart, regenerative, sustainable agriculture farming practices. And lastly, our third program is sustainability and support services. This program is a little bit more broadly focused to meet the needs of some of our partner communities and others that we work with through a range of different services, ranging from climate action planning to sustainability planning, LEED certifications, brownfield redevelopment, capacity assistance, a whole range of services. All of this is available on our website to look at a little bit more in depth. I encourage you, there's even a few blog posts right at the homepage that you can explore at your leisure. So please be sure to take a look at that. And how is all of this supported? It is funded by people like you, all of you who joined us this evening that supported us with a $10 contribution. Thank you all for your generosity in making this event work. All of your contributions are tax deductible. We are a 501c3 nonprofit with a platinum seal of transparency from GuideStar. And we also have a few other ways in which you can continue to support our work, such as our silent auction, which I'll be talking about a little bit more in a second. But in case you haven't seen that already in some of our emails and social media, that will be closing tomorrow night at 6 p.m. So there's still plenty of opportunities for you to get your bids in. Want to give a shout out to our sponsors who made this evening possible. First and foremost, we have Illinois Tech, the Kaplan Institute, more specifically the Ed Kaplan Family Institute for Innovation and Tech Entrepreneurship. Want to thank them. They have a mission to nurture the advancement of critical and creative ideas, foster interdisciplinary and external collaboration, and create a culture that enables innovation and tech entrepreneurship to flourish on Illinois Tech's campus and throughout the larger community as well. So thank you to the Illinois Tech Kaplan Institute, as well as our anonymous supporter who helped fund this event. And as I mentioned, we have plenty of exciting auction items. In fact, I couldn't fit them all on one slide here, so you'll just have to bear with me with that. We do have, you can feel free to capture the QR code that you see at the top right of your screen while I babble on for another minute or so. But you can also visit it directly by visiting 32auctions.com/DeltaGSB, as in Green Soapbox, Delta GSB 2022. Lots of great items that you can find, everything ranging from composting services to art museums in Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Chicago. We have spices, we have, oh goodness, brewery tours, coffee beans, all kinds of good stuff. We even have recycled granite here. You can win jewelry, handcrafted jewelry made from reclaimed Brazilian stone that is over 500 million with a B years old. So lots of really cool items that you can win. A little bit about this event itself. Green Soapbox is an annual event that is organized by our Delta emerging leaders. It's always through the lens of highlighting a topic that needs some conversation around it. And city resilience, as you all know, is the theme for this evening. But in the past couple of years, I want to highlight, last year we did an event focused on cannabis sustainability and equity, specifically here in Illinois, as well as beach erosion and climate change, also a very relevant one for tonight's discussion. So I encourage you to check those out. They are available, the recordings are available on YouTube. So if you love tonight so much, you can just continue binging on all of the Green Soapboxes that you want to watch. Who needs Netflix, right? Also, this event is, as I mentioned, organized entirely by the Delta Emerging Leaders Associate Board. And if you're interested in helping us put on events like this, well, I got good news for you, because you can join the Dells. As of today, we just launched our application. So if you know of somebody, or if you are somebody who is interested in joining our associate board, please encourage them to apply. The Delta Emerging Leaders are emerging professionals with a passion for promoting sustainability and environmental justice here in the Chicago region and beyond. You can apply and learn more by visiting delta-institute.org/dells. We also have 2 optional information sessions that you can attend on April 21st or May 16th, all available at delta-institute.org/events. And lastly, you can engage with the Dells on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So please be sure to check those out if you are interested in volunteering with us for a 1-year renewable term beginning July 1st. Speaking of events, we have a couple that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of. Our Earth Day celebration is April 22nd. This is going to be a really fun online opportunity for you to hear some inspiring stories of local environmental champions. We have some great people who we partner with, and we're just so excited to share more about their stories. This event is free. It's online, so please, if you're looking for a way to mark Earth Day specifically, join us. It's a Friday afternoon. You can come. You can take work off early. You could take the whole day off. Tell your boss I said it's okay. Tell him Patrick Murphy said it's okay. Hopefully you can join us. In fact, I would encourage you to go ahead and register this evening, so that way you don't forget. And then 1 week later, we have our Arbor Day Trivia Hour. That is going to be on April 29th. Again, it's going to be a Friday afternoon, 2 p.m. Suggested contribution for this one, $25, or at least a minimum contribution of $10. We're going to have some fun prizes that you can win, and just have some fun, test your knowledge about trees and forests and the history of Arbor Day. It should be a lot of fun. So I hope to see some of you there. We have a lot of social media channels where you can engage with us. Feel free to tweet at us during tonight's presentation, or just really at any time. All of them are here. You can find us and the Dells on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and as I mentioned before, on YouTube. All right, with all of that out of the way, and we will be sending you a follow-up email with links to all of these things as well, too, just in case you forget. Want to go over some housekeeping items for this evening. First and foremost, please, I encourage you, don't be shy. If you have questions for us or for any of the panelists, please use the questions and answers button. You can share your questions at any time during the presentation, anytime whatsoever, but know that we won't be addressing them until the very end. So I'd encourage you, once it strikes you, go ahead and submit that question, because we want to see them coming in so we can also plan for them toward the end of our program this evening. If you have any technical questions, please message the host. That will be yours truly using the chat window. And as I mentioned, we will be publishing this video on Delta's YouTube channel later this week. And with all of that being said, I am pleased to present tonight's moderator. That would be Delta Institute's very own Bill Schleizer. He is our CEO. As CEO, Bill oversees the organization's programmatic strategy, operations, engagement, and fundraising efforts. From 2011 to 2015, he served as managing director, guiding project implementation across several areas, including those related to environmental markets, climate, agriculture, water, and ecosystems, and has been on staff at Delta since 2004. He earned his MS in environmental analysis and decision-making from Rice University and received a BS in ecology, evolution, and organismal biology and environmental studies at Tulane University. He serves on the Cook County Commission for Social Innovation and has also been named one of Crain Chicago Business notable LGBTQ plus executives. Without further ado, take it away, Bill.
Hello, everybody, and good evening. I'm really excited to be here with you all tonight and having this conversation with all these experts on city resilience. It's going to be an excellent panel, and I want to thank the Delta Emerging Leaders for all that they have done to coordinate this and put this awesome event together again this year. So thank you all, and let's jump into it. I'm really excited, and I will kick us off by introducing our amazing panelists. We'll start off with Naomi Davis, who is the founder and president of Blacks in Green, a Chicago-based national network for advancing green village building. Blacks in Green serves as a bridge and catalyst among communities and their stakeholders in the design and development of green, self-sustaining, mixed-income, walkable villages in communities owned and populated by African Americans. Naomi has shared that she's an urban theorist, attorney, activist, and proud granddaughter of Mississippi sharecroppers. Additionally, she's a certified lead green associate and just an amazing and phenomenal person overall, being recognized by Chicago Magazine for their Green Award. She's an Environmental Hero Award as recognized by the Illinois governor, and is one of Ebony Magazine's Power 100. And among many other things. And so excited to have her on board with us here tonight. She also serves on a number of nonprofit boards, including that of Emerald South Economic Development Collaborative, which Delta is currently partnering with to implement natural and green infrastructure solutions on Chicago's South Side. So welcome, Naomi. Our second panelist tonight is Stephanie Hacker, hailing from Milwaukee. I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm glad that we have a Wisconsinite on board representing Milwaukee. Stephanie joins us as a senior planner from GRAEF. And in this role, Stephanie has worked on projects like the waterfront development and comprehensive recreation plan for the city of Ashland, the Transform Milwaukee Strategic Action Plan, but works across the region, including locally here in the Chicago region with the Village of Oak Park. She's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and is also a LEED accredited professional. What's really great about Delta's work and all of the networks we get to work in is that we are somehow connected to folks in unusual ways. But Stephanie works at GRAEF with Sarah Wolwema, who happens to be the communications committee chair for our Emerging Leader Board. So this is really fun, and we'll get to some fun facts about our folks later. And our third panelist rounding out our panel on city resilience tonight is Ron Harris, who is the city of Minneapolis's Chief Resilience Officer, where he served in that role since February 2019. In this work, he's focusing on three main pillars: racial equity, economic inclusion, and environmental justice. And prior to being appointed the Chief Resilience Officer, he was the senior advisor to the Minneapolis City Council president for 2 years, where he negotiated the passage of multiple citywide policies, including mandated increase in minimum wage for all people working in Minneapolis. And Ron also is connected to Delta, where he is a member of our Risk Solutions Project, which stands for Resilient Infrastructure, Sustainable Communities. So we're excited to have him talking about his experience in Minneapolis tonight. And he's also a public speaker, political influencer, and consultant, and is passionate about developing the next generation of leaders, particularly in the public sector, which is something that I'm also very passionate about. We need folks helping us do the work and moving forward. So thank you all, and let's jump into it. I'm super excited to have you all here. So let us jump in, and before we kind of jump into the topic of resilience itself, I love to learn how people, what their career path was. What was your journey? How did you wind up where you are today? And what is something that wasn't in your bio that you'd love to share with folks? Let's start with Ron.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation. Bill, thanks so much for the invite to join you all this evening, even though you had to track me down via email more than once, because I'm terrible with my inbox, but thanks for the invitation. Ron Harris here, Chief Resilience Officer from the city of Minneapolis. My career actually did not start in the space of environmental activism or resilience or sustainability, actually. My career started, well, this kind of path to public service really started in college. My freshman year, I was at Hampton University in the state of Virginia. That was in 2008. And I got really, really invested in volunteering for then Senator Obama's presidential campaign. Didn't know anything about politics, really. Was just really fired up about this guy who shared many qualities that I had never really seen in a public figure. And as a freshman, I would just go and volunteer at the local Democratic office, knock doors. A few weeks later, I get my roommate involved. So the two of us would go a couple of times a week. Then the dorm floor, then by the end of the campaign, the entire dorm was going out to talk to people about why this thing called politics was important for people to participate in. Fast forward to the night of the election, watch parties in my room. And none of us thought that we could pull this off, right? We were just like, hey, we got close. We're really excited that we got involved, but we'll see what happens. And then I remember Virginia got called blue, first time in like 44 years. And about 10 or 11 minutes later, and we felt great about that, right? Being in Virginia, being a college campus, we went to different college campuses and really felt that we had actually done this. We actually turned our state. And 10 or 11 minutes later, they called the election for Barack Obama. And you could hear a pin drop. It felt like for 10 minutes, it was probably just 10 seconds. And then all of a sudden, being on campus, you could hear the entire campus just erupt in euphoria. Tens of thousands of people, right? Cheering, clapping, dancing. It was one of those experiences where I knew I had to be a part of some public service. The joy and the hope that people felt. It didn't hurt that it was my 19th birthday as well. So I'm getting all these birthday texts being like, congratulations, happy birthday, all this stuff. And what that really led to was working in some small nonprofits after college, really advocating at the intersection of race, public policy, and the economy. That work is where we were advocating for some of these workplace issues. And through that work, ended up working at the city of Minneapolis, where I've now been for 6 years. And so for me, no matter what it is, whether it's politics, sustainability, resilience, workplace issues, et cetera, really try to center human beings in the experience and center human beings in what ails us the most. And we can advocate for people through any of these lenses.
Oh, that's awesome. And one of the things that we often work to deal with here at Delta is that remembering that humans are a part of the environment and actually a critical central part of it, and really integrating folks into the environment and economy instead of being, on the outside looking in is really, really important. Stephanie, let's talk about how you became, a senior planner at GRAEF. What was your journey into a role like that?
Well, thank you, Bill, and good evening to everyone. The Delta Institute is an incredible organization, and the more that I hear and have heard over the last few weeks, the more I'd like to continue to be involved. I serve as a practice area leader for our planning and urban design group at GRAEF. And how I got there, I'll try to summarize very briefly. I went to study physics. I've always enjoyed the science and math space and looked for higher ed opportunities where I could practice and become an astronaut. It probably would serve me well to have those skills now that we're talking about climate adaptation and climate change. But I decided that social sciences would be a really good blend for me. Bill, I'm glad you're laughing. Thank you. And that I couldn't turn away from the interaction and social science and science bring together. So I studied geography. So when I went to look for graduate schools, urban planning had already been something introduced to me through my geography program. And I found that Milwaukee was a place where I was welcomed, even though I didn't have any family history in the city, and a place where I could be very authentically involved in community development matters. And coming out of finishing my undergraduate degree in geography and then going to look for urban planning programs, I spent a year with AmeriCorps. And I feel like I'm still learning today, but at that time I learned how to be more authentically involved with community development and really move the needle in ways that communities wanted to move. So I found that Milwaukee was a place where we could do that together. So that said, I found an internship with a place called Planning and Design Institute, and the founder and president, I believe, is a participant in the audience today, and took that internship into what became a full-time position at PDI, and then PDI became a part of GRAEF. So that's just a quick journey to how I'm now involved with the firm.
That's awesome. So we have somebody who could ask you really hard pointed questions is what I'm hearing in the Q&A section of the evening. So we'll definitely get that going.
I'll get thrilled.
And finally, Naomi, as the president and founder of Blacks and Greens, how did you come on that journey?
Well, it was indirect. And thanks for having me here this evening. We're longtime friends of Delta Institute, and just really happy to be able to join you tonight and your panel and your audience. You know, it was really sorrow and despair and questioning life itself as I had watched over an arc of decades, Black communities from one end of the country to the other really dissolve, and that walk to work, walk to shop, walk to learn, walk to play village where I had grown up was now gone extinct. And I grew up, you know, in a very beautiful, relaxed, mixed income community. And the idea that we could own the businesses in the area and walk and circulate our money, and people knew your name, that sense of belonging, all of that was really, I didn't realize how much it formed me. And watching that dissolve in slow motion was something I just could not live with. I couldn't live with it. And I began thinking, what can I do? What can one person do? I mean, it's such a wild, intractable problem. And I began to do research about community development. And pretty soon that took me to this thing called sustainability. This was back at in the late 1990s. And the idea that there were intentional communities, and there were communes, and there were all these kinds of places. And an intersection of ideas and feelings happened along the way. I always wanted to have a family business, and my brother, who lived in South Carolina, invited me to come and open a business with him. And he was very, very excited, but he was also like doing a disclaimer. He was like, you know, Denise, that's my middle name, are you sure you want to come down here? Because it's not like being at college. I was a Fiskite. It's not like going down south for the summer, you know, like millions of us did as part of our Great Migration heritage. It's different. And lo and behold, I made the choice. I took the leap. I moved down to a little tiny town called York, South Carolina. And our first week down there was a Ku Klux Klan parade down Main Street. And that was also the time when the beating of Rodney King took place on national specter, and it became a really complicated set of emotions. The fact that I was down there in the Deep South, where literally they said, "Our Negroes are happy. Don't come down here," shaking things up. I was doing a documentary on a Supreme Court ruling on redistricting, and they thought, "Oh, what are you doing that for? What is up with that?" And so it was isolating. It was deeply, deeply denying of my existence and my value. And I would get so upset that I would jump in my little 8-cylinder Ford and head out into the woods. I would just take any path, dirt road. And what I found was that no matter how bad I felt going in, I always felt immediately well when I got there. And I remembered, lo and behold, yeah, I was that kid at the family picnic who was always like, "Where's Denise? Oh, she's out there. She'll be fine. She'll be back." And just have always had a deep reverie, curiosity relationship about nature. And when I put these two really sort of profound life experiences, like at that intersection of that point in my life, what I began to be guided to is the idea of the new green economy as an economic anchor for the revival of the Black community. And what I wanted to do was make a buffer. They call it resilience. They weren't calling it resilience 20 years ago, but I said, there's a way to use wealth building through the new green economy. There's a way to use health building through the new green economy. And we can restore our place in the world if we anchor ourselves in this new green thing. And that was how it started. In 2007, Van Jones came to town. Green Festival was happening. It was like, my best friend was like, who lives in Minneapolis right now, by the way, Ron. She was like, "There's this guy named Van, and he's coming. There's this thing called Green Festival." And we incorporated and we launched, and we've never looked back.
That is amazing. And thank you all for sharing that journey. And that intersectionality of like nature and human interaction is what actually got me inspired about sustainability. Coming in central Wisconsin, my dad was a farmer. My grandfather worked at a paper mill. Depending which way the wind blew, you knew what was operating when. And I was always at that intersection of humans and natural resources has been core, and that's something that we bring here into the Delta Institute work. Now, I'm glad, Naomi, that you brought together. You mentioned the 90s, because that's when also I got kind of into this. When we were back in the 90s, we were talking about mitigation, which is let's stop the emissions from happening, and then it got into adaptation. Well, we're going to have some change. We better get ready for it. And now we're into resilience. And so I want to ask the panels, how do you actually define resilience? Because it is a broad term and a lot of people are using it for, different parts of what resilience is. So it's always good to kind of come into this conversation really with some understanding of what do we mean by resilience. So Stephanie, I'll start with you. How would you define resilience?
Hard to follow up after Naomi's story. So that was wonderful. The conversations we've been having around sustainability and resilience in our office have been many years deep, but much more focused over the last year. And so I wouldn't say that this is only my thought on sustainability and resilience, but a team's thought, a community's thought over many conversations. So how we've defined resilience is that first, a platform to become more resilient to economic shocks, environmental shocks, social shocks, is to have some footing in triple bottom line sustainability, which, as we all know, is not a term that we've invented in our team, but in John Elkington and others' histories about 26, 27 years ago, to say, how can we better measure what we consider the bottom line? And so having that footing in economic, environmental, and equitable outcomes to me is the baseline for then looking toward how to become more resilient in ways that help protect or elevate economic, environmental, and equitable outcomes. So we've been defining resilience as not only understanding that we have to be adaptable to economic, environmental, and equitable shocks, but we have to be looking at triple bottom line as a baseline to that.
And Naomi, I'll toss it over to you. When you're talking about resilience from your perspective, how would you define it to somebody?
Yeah, well, I think, and I loved how you traced that mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. It was I was like, when Bill McKibben, and it was 350.org, and we were going to get back down to 350 parts per million, and lo and behold, here we are, way over that tipping point of 400, right? Resilience for us has always meant that we could thrive, as we like to call it, come what may, that we have an internal operating system, and we are our own emergency management system. Why is that? Because Black communities are hit first and worst by the impacts of global warming. We're resourced least and last, and in fact contribute the very least to the crisis. So we undertook the proposition, or the supposition, or the hypothesis, you know what, maybe help is not on the way. And maybe it's up to us to make sure that we create a system that allows us to be happy and healthy, regardless of what government does, regardless of what the corporations do. And of course, many of us consider government and the corporations such a big part of the problem. Let's get a reality check. So I'm saying that word buffer again. I'm saying thrive. I'm saying that it's the ability to receive the shock, absorb the shock, survive the shock, and return or restabilize in an efficient and speedy way. We understand. We call it what's going to happen when the truck don't come, and of course we saw that with COVID. It's like, we understand that the roads and bridges are vulnerable in this time of climate crisis. We understand that big farming is undergoing just tremendous problems. So supply chains of all kinds are at risk now. So how do we live as neighbors in place? And one of the things that we resolved years and years ago when we first launched was that, and it wasn't like just our new idea, but in talking to emergency management experts in the field, we came to understand that the best way to be resilient in real time was to know your neighbors, to be in right relationship, and to inside of a spirit and an experience of kinship, because that is the building block, not the bottles of water and the cans of meat. So that's our take on resilience.
Awesome, thank you. And Ron, it's in your title, so you got to have a definition around resilience.
He gets the last word.
Yeah, my definition is what they said. I'll first state that, I think one of the mistakes of the environmental movement was shaping this climate change as an environmental problem. We should have started talking about its impact on people, its impact on supply chains, like you mentioned, Ms. Davis, all these things. And so when I first started this gig in Minneapolis in 2019, it was clear pretty quickly that the definition that we had for resilience was actually too slim. It was really just around climate resilience. And what I like about this space of resilience is that we actually root it in the locality of the problems that they're experiencing. So a perspective of resilience in Minneapolis is going to look way different than a perspective of resilience in Miami, because we have completely different challenges, even though we mean, similar, the same things when we say it. So for me, the baseline definition of resilience is essentially our capacity to survive, to adapt, and to thrive in the midst of shock or stress. Taking that a little bit deeply, I think resilience is holistic, and it's intended to help communities increase adaptive capacity, improve quality of life, and ultimately thrive amidst those cascading shocks and stresses. What's required, though, I think, for people to thrive is also having a community and a government and surrounding institutions in partnership that are actually accountable for supporting that thriving and supporting that well-being. And what we're really trying to do in Minneapolis is center equity in a vision of resilience. So equity to me is a process of eliminating disparities and improving outcomes for everybody. It's an intentional and it's a continual practice of changing policies, practices, systems, program structures, what have you, by prioritizing like demonstrable, measurable change in the lives of people on the margins. And so when you combine a vision of resilience that's really about not just building back, not even just building back better, but building back resilient, right? That how can we be better as a result of the challenges that we face? How can we get on an even better trajectory because of those challenges? And we can talk a little bit more in the conversation about how we can do those things. But I think by expanding that definition to include not just the environment, but also our economy is also about equity, and then really centering that vision with how people are experiencing these shocks. Ultimately, with resilience, what we really want to do is advance community's sense of self-agency, similar to what you said, Naomi, about we're our own managers, we're our own emergency planners, we are responsible for how we come back. It's not that we avoid the disruption because we know the disruption is coming. It's that we widen our container to absorb the disruption, right? That if we can't mitigate it, we're going to widen our container. We're going to widen our adaptive ability to, our adaptive capacity, to come back from that.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the ways that I think about it is weaving the web together. And what we've allowed the systems around us to do is kind of take all those pieces apart from a community level, and it doesn't align anymore, and it doesn't allow us those resilient structures, those community infrastructure, and that social infrastructure that's necessary as a core element of community resilience. So I think that all of these answers are amazing. If you weave all of them together, it's really getting at the breadth of what it takes to become more resilient in cities. So now that we kind of set the stage around kind of the definition, let's talk about some of the challenges. You know, that you guys are on the ground every day dealing with resilience, and I'd love your perspectives of, you know, what are the top couple of things that keep popping up for you all in your work that really are barriers to truly becoming more resilient? Stephanie, why don't we start with you then on this one? Because you do a lot of work with communities all around the region. So what are you seeing?
It's going to be tough to encapsulate in a few quick thoughts, but why does taking action matter at the individual level? I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges that I see when we talk with communities and on behalf of communities to try to advocate for climate action or for being more resilient or sustainable. You know, how is there time to take steps to be more sustainable or resilient at an individual level, and why does that matter? So taking the time to connect to a community level of passion, right? Why does this community exist and what do they care about? Or taking the time to connect on individual levels of what makes you passionate about living, and why does it matter if you take action in sustainability or resilience? Those are the types of conversations that need to be had, and in some cases, they can't be had without being somewhat disingenuous, right? How do you connect on a point of passion when there's only so much time to start to reach into those conversations? And all said, I hope that just by starting there and not ending there, maybe there's more we can come back to in the next questions, can at least allude to the fact that, you know, we have to drive passion and connect individual and community level passion to the types of change that may be needed in order to better adapt to climate change or to be more resilient.
Ron, what do you see from Minneapolis as kind of the overarching barriers that you're coming up to around creating resilience in the city?
That's a really great question. I'll start big and then zoom in. So what we're collectively experiencing is what a colleague of mine calls the five-headed horseman. Certainly the climate emergency, racial injustice, and we've seen that on a different scale, especially after the murder of George Floyd. economic inequality that we've always known about, attacks on our institutions like democracy, like press, like voting, et cetera. And then, you know, of course, the public health crisis with COVID-19 and then the subsequent variants and how all these things impact. And so at the crux of it, all of these impact marginalized communities to a far deeper extent than any other community. And at a city, the budget that's required for these continued responses to cascading shocks and these longer term stresses is actually unsustainable. And cities will actually go bankrupt if we continue to follow the same approach. The problem is that we keep following the same approach. It's, in my work at least, we're really trying to talk a lot more about power, who has it, who doesn't have it, how do they get it, how do we share it, how do we, et cetera, how do we get out of the way of it? And governments aren't quite ready to, if we're not ready to talk about it, we're for sure not ready to take action on some of those things. Because if you think about it, no matter what the shock is, whether it's a climate-related shock, whether it's a social-related shock, whether it's an economic recession, what have you, what people need to recover are pretty much the same things, right? And that's the case that I try to make internally, is that we can call it whatever we want to call it. You know, people need these resources on the other end of or in the midst of the crisis, on the other end of the crisis. And the big secret actually is the very same things that people need to recover, we actually could have been doing that to pre-cover. They're the exact same activities, right? And that's the thing that we're missing, at least in my work, is that it takes a crisis for us to figure that out. And I'm really trying to get us to a spot where it doesn't take a crisis to figure that out, that we just start to do the right thing because. And here's the deal. As a resilience practitioner, particularly dealing with communities and dealing with people, working for an institution that government traditionally isn't trusted. I mean, my currency is trust, right? Like, we are in the red with community trust. And so if we can't get you to, if you don't trust us enough to trust mask wearing and social distancing in Minneapolis, if you can't trust our government enough not to kill Black people at the hands of police, right? If we're at that trust recession, if I'll call it, maybe a trust depression, we're not going to be able to mobilize communities to respond to climate. We're not going to be able to mobilize communities to think differently about economic systems, right? And different things that impact us, right? So it's like, to bring it all back to the single point that I think is challenging is building that community trust. And we have to demonstrate that we're willing to share power and even give away power, again, to advance community's sense of self-agency. And that's really one of the only ways that we can start to build that trust.
Naomi, from your perspective, what would you like to add to the conversation around barriers?
Well, I'm in deep agreement with Ron about the do for self, that portion that we're not waiting for others to solve our crisis for us. I'm in deep agreement about the whole idea of preparing. And that's really the nature of Blacks in Green. We were founded on the idea that if we get started now and we get ourselves holistically strong now, then we are better prepared to weather a storm that we know is coming. And so the idea that we as a people have been acculturated to wait, and of course this is both true and not true, because there's no one more resilient in the universe than Black people, and we really do have an experience of our narrative of triumph as a people. So don't take this the wrong way, but. And people who know me know that I talk about this, this whole help the Negro thing. Over 50 years of the civil rights arc and helping the Negro never got helped. And we're in desperate straits now because we believed and depended and waited for that help. And so the idea that we are also so accustomed to struggle, that we're accustomed to making a silk purse out of a sow's ear, that we can do, one pride in the Black community is how much I did with how little, you know, and it's a machismo. And what it buries is this idea that, you know, not only do we deserve more, our fair share, but it's actually not proper or fitting for us to have to scramble and scrap so hard to make it. So when you talk about the climate crisis against a backdrop of, you know, just a running script of trauma, a running script of lack, and the idea that there's a climate crisis. Well, too many of our people are not like, okay, so it's warmer. Is that really a bad thing? And of course, you know, lots of conversations like that in the neighborhood. But when you don't have, when organizations like Blacks in Green are not equitably funded, when we don't have the resources that our crosstown neighbors have, we really are pressed to be able to press into our neighborhoods with the information in real time, repetitively, in a way that it can break through. Everybody knows that learning some things requires great repetition. It requires different kinds of examples. And so to connect people that there is a crisis, there are going to be dire consequences, is a real challenge, because we just live with so much challenge.
Well, and that goes to not only the trust, but needing to be there. So there's the education and connecting it to the passion and to the things that people care about, like what Stephanie was saying. There's the trust deficit. Who are they hearing from and why? Are they hearing from them? Is it actually for authentic reasons of being helpful, or is it for something else? So, you know, there's a lot of layers upon layers of stuff here. So, and you all are coming in from a public community perspective, private sector perspective, from three, you know, Midwestern towns, but every Midwestern town is unique, as you probably all know. What I'd love to hear from you all is, what is kind of something that's unique that is helping with resilience in the community that you're working in, or that you're from, and something that's maybe, you know, unique that's hurting, you know, what your paths to resilience in your communities. So, and then, so I'll open it up for that. And then I also want to give you time to ask each other questions. We've got, you guys will learn from each other. I'm learning from all of you, and as our attendees. So let's start with that. So what's a unique challenge in Milwaukee, Stephanie? And what's, you know, a unique asset into that community when we're talking about resilience?
Boy. So first, you know, we represent a private sector entity that has the good fortune on occasion of collaborating with the city of Milwaukee, but not representing the city of Milwaukee directly. So I might broaden the.
We won't hold you to any statements as like speaking for the city. Don't worry.
Great. Yeah, so I'm situated in the Milwaukee region. So, you know, 20 years of experience. I can speak more to the maybe southeastern Wisconsin region, and what I've seen is helping with resilience and maybe what isn't helping. So, Bill, did I characterize your question correctly?
Yep.
Okay. So what I see is what's helping with resilience is twofold right now. COVID and every event with racial equity between 2020 and 2022, which I'd say, you know, it's part of one of two things that I think are really helping discuss the importance of being resilient and being resilient to shocks and changes. And the second that's helping is tying resilience and sustainability to economic development. And for right or wrong, that's what I'm seeing as, you know, two areas that seem to help advance conversations about the importance of being resilient across southeastern Wisconsin and occasionally beyond that geography. What I see is not helping the conversation is the level of distraction from the last couple of years with COVID, just specifically COVID. So it's both helpful and hurtful. Because for many in this day and age, it seems, and this will be potentially a gross generalization, but it seems to be a crutch of, oh, things have been so hard because, you know, of COVID, when most of my generation hasn't really experienced real hardship. And so there's a time where I've seen that, talking about resilience is actually limited or diminished by members of the community using COVID and its experience as a crutch, and also because COVID took away some things that were very much lavish and add-ons to one's life. So I don't know if that is a place for us to start our conversation, but I would really love to hear from the other panelists as we add on to that.
Awesome. So Naomi, what's a unique, barrier to your work here in Chicago, and a unique asset, do you think, in the community work that you're doing?
Well, historically here, and Ron may have some experience of this as governments transform, there, here in Chicago, our former mayor, he operated by decree from the 5th floor as to how we were going to fix this climate crisis. And in the fallout of that, it was crystal clear. And I was on his transition team for energy, environment, and open space back in 2012 when he first came into office. And I was begging him across all of his terms, you got to break things down and distribute them to the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are not going to get your glossy booklet with what we achieved in greenhouse gas levels in 2015. They're not going to read that. They don't want to read it. They're not going to understand it. I barely understand it. So, what you need to do is create a pipeline of real people in government to real people in the neighborhoods. And so we are seeing that with our current mayor. And really, really big shout out to Office of Sustainability, Angela Tovar and Kyra Woods, who get it, got it, and moved on it, that they have been in partnership with neighbors now. Blacks and Green is one of the many organizations doing town halls on the climate crisis and the action plan associated with it. And in that regard, that's part of the good news, or the solution is social media. The idea that social media has made it just so much easier to get information out. And although it is different and more challenging in the Black community because of the digital divide, but we understand the great power that we have to get the word out through the network, through social media. And so we're working that for all we've got.
Awesome. And Ron, let's turn it over to you. Unique asset in Minneapolis, unique barrier.
Yeah, there's a couple of unique assets. One incredibly unique asset for us has been, and I don't want to minimize this at all, the murder of George Floyd. And I say that because what everybody else saw on CNN, right? The rioting and the protesting and the fires and the burning and journalists getting hit with rubber, all that, right, was only part of the story. The other part of the story, though, was about, that no one really paid attention to, was like how our community actually came together in one of the most painful moments in our city's history, right? Businesses opened up their doors and fed hungry neighbors and demonstrators, right? Like completely just switch up their business model and became kind of a resource hub where mutual aid efforts and supplies and food were organized and mobilized. Community members organized their own ambulatory services because 911 could not respond to all of the calls across the city, could not get through because some of the economic corridors were blocked. People raised money, organized rideshare, pharmacy pickup and drop off, made sure the elderly had access to their resources and medicines and things like that. And we saw all kinds of partnerships meeting all sorts of different kinds of needs. That is an incredibly unique asset because what community did, frankly, was lay out the blueprint for how we need to then operate. So instead of expecting community to mobilize itself, right, when they're an event of a disruption or an incident, like what if we resource them all year long during normal time so that, again, we widen that capacity to deal with the challenge because we've been investing in it the entire year, right? They would have had even more capacity and capital to spend down to address not only the immediate disruption, but then also the path forward, which is the resilient part, right? Another asset relatively related to that is Minneapolis, the Twin Cities area, is the highest per capita Fortune 500 companies in the US. And when COVID happened, the first onset of COVID and then George Floyd's murder, right? The calls that I got from a lot of these CEOs, chiefs of staff, social responsibility folks, et cetera, we have a lot of awesome neighbors in our community, both in the corporations and in the nonprofits and the philanthropic community as well. And so those are two really awesome, unique assets. I mean, one of the main parts of my job is trying to put together some of these public and private partnerships. And one of the things that I share with folks all the time is, hey, y'all, like collaboration is a new competitive advantage, and they love it, right? They're super down with collaborating to meet the needs of community because they know what it felt like when in the midst of the disruption. A unique challenge is, and it might not be that unique, but two of them are, one, the fact that we are a Midwestern town. Climate change doesn't feel as scary as it would on the coast. People are actually looking forward to warmer climates, not really understanding what that actually means in the aggregate, you know, and that makes it really, really hard to mobilize and capture the attention necessary to make the impacts. The other part of it is that, you know, Minneapolis is a very educated town, and I mean that both with degrees and non-degrees. People are really, really smart here. And I forgot what I was going to say on that point. It's going to come back. Another challenge is similar to what you had talked about, Stephanie, which is folks are distracted. There's a lot going on. We you know, because of George Floyd's murder, so much of the energy and attention is on police reform. And while that is an important issue, it has kind of sucked up the oxygen in the room and has made it really hard for us, especially because our climate events aren't abrupt. It makes it really hard to mobilize people around that. You know, ours are going to be aging infrastructure, longer term, right? Warmer, drier summers, right? Oddly enough, the school year last year ended about a month early because the infrastructure could not handle the heat at that point in time in the schools, right? And so they had to let kids out early because infrastructure wasn't invested in and not prepared for this moment. They put regulations on when we could water our lawns because of the drought that we experienced last year. And so kind of wrapping that up into a bow a little bit, recognizing that we got a lot of assets because of what we went through in 2020. And also it sucked up all the oxygen, and that it's hard to get folks thinking about what it means to be resilient to some of these shocks and some of these stresses. And so that's another kind of reason why we wanted to broaden the definition to be a bit more holistic, because people can connect the dots, but again, it's hard to keep track of what's going on.
Yeah, there's so many drivers that it's just like overload. Like it's all of those things all at the same time. And the weather is the actually really interesting one, because a lot of Midwestern people kind of focus on weather. I thought I might have been a meteorologist in a different, you know, phase of my life, like Stephanie was going to be an astronaut. But it snowed 28 inches at the end of April in my hometown 3 years ago in April. And it'll get warmer, sure, but it's also going to be freakier weather. So like we have to deal with all those things. And if you're letting out school a month early in a city like Minneapolis, that has an economic impact on all those families. They have to come together and figure out how to deal with the situation in a new way that they never had planned for. And these are the sorts of kind of these reinforcing cascading effects that we really do have to get on top of. So I would love you guys to ask each other some questions. As we get more questions in from the audience, we're going to start taking some audience questions. But is there anything you guys want to ask each other?
I had the opportunity to ask Ron for a hot minute before we started at 6:30 tonight, but Naomi, I could ask you, is it for the UN report that has most recently been released, just updating the sense of urgency around the climate and how quickly we need to act? Is that something that has come up in your last day or two in the communities around you, in your networks, you know, or is it, yeah, okay.
No, it's something like, you know, the chronic stress and, you know, believe it or not, there are really credible studies about inheriting intergenerational stress, that there's a DNA level coding of the amount of stress that we carry. And so it is an obstacle that we have to overcome to reach the attention of our neighbors. But you know, right now we've got some really, really positive stuff going on. I mentioned the climate action plan, which is being discussed at community level around the city. And of course, there's data around that, and it's the data that we all see and know. It's not something that's going to really percolate into, for context, we just don't, our average everyday neighbors wouldn't have a, you know, just sort of, they wouldn't understand what those numbers meant, and how could they? I mean, I sit in scores of meetings in a given quarter where subject matter experts are, you know, sharing the depth of their knowledge, and so much of it goes over my head, and I'm very educated and informed. So I would say the other really good thing that's happening right now is a citywide decarbonization campaign. Again, getting down into translating those ecological and geological crises into, what does it mean to my household? What does that mean for me? And so we've got a wonderful campaign underfoot, a cooking contest to encourage people to try induction cooktops. And so family recipes, induction cooktops, what's the intersection there? And the idea that we have to make the data real to people at the level where we live. And we've got a whole citywide master plan going on right now. It's called We Will Chicago. So I would say that, you know, if we're talking, and it's got to be rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. If we're talking about these issues, I mean, we're as smart as anybody else. It's not like we can't get it, but it's something that needs to happen more frequently, more in depth, over time in our communities at the community level. And that's going to be our secret of success.
I'm happy
Ron,
to,
I mean, I'm
happy to be a judge of the cooking contest. I just wanted to like put that out there.
Would you? You're volunteering? Oh, that's so big of you.
Definitely.
That's so big of you.
And go ahead and ask your question, Naomi. Sorry about that.
I was just, you know, wondering at the infrastructural level or the operational level about how his city is breaking it down and moving it out to. I mean, you talked about the crisis, and of course, I call him St. George because he really did change everything in a manner of speaking. In the philanthropic community, the reality about the disparities just really jumped out at the board levels of these philanthropies around the country, around the world, and giving at a different magnitude began. So there really is a whole new pre-George and post-George. And I think as the epicenter of that place, Ron probably has a real bird's eye view of how, you know, how government can get, you know, what are the methods and what are the tools for getting communicating with neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, thinking about that example that I shared earlier about how community came together, I'm literally taking notes. I mean, I'm a lifelong community organizer, and seeing the level of community organizing and mobilizing was like, oh, this is exactly what we should have been doing the whole time. I think generally we've kind of committed to saying, you know, never again can we ignore the most vulnerable and the most marginalized among us. We can't be siloed in our thinking because people aren't siloed in their lives. We can no longer ignore hard to measure qualities in cities like I said earlier, trust in government, social cohesion, social connectedness, et cetera. you know, you had mentioned stress and trauma in the DNA, and I use that often in some of my talks. The other side of that, though, is if you can map stress and trauma in the DNA of Black folks, given the 400-year history in this country, resilience also is flowing through my blood as well, right? Innovation is flowing through my blood as well. Strategy and you know, genius is flowing through my blood as well, because without those things, we would not be here. And so having that event happen here in town just super underscores my voice and being able to say, actually, no, this is what we need to be doing. Our actions must always answer the questions for who, how much, by when. And that is something I'm very, very bold about. It's like, if we're going to do something, who is it for? How much are we spending? By when can we expect this to go out the door? That isn't always met with an embrace, but I think it's our job to put that on the table. And then, you know, we need to continue to leverage cities as unique laboratories of innovation. How do we activate and convene sectors that have been left out or have opted out, frankly, of being part of the solution? And in Minneapolis, and I think in this country overall, if we're ever to build an equitable future, we must first reconcile with our past racial injustices as a country, because many of them are still plaguing us today. Now, in practice, what that looks like for us is, I'll give you one project that I'm working on, kind of the main project that I'm working on, is the concept of resilience hubs. And resilience hub, I'm sure folks are familiar with. For those who aren't, these are community-facing or community-serving institutions or facilities that are really set up and really kind of catalyzed to support residents day to day, to coordinate that communication like you were talking about earlier, to distribute resources, and ultimately help us reduce carbon pollution while also enhancing quality of life. There is a community center that is blocks away from George Floyd Square, the intersection where he was murdered. And it's an historically Black institution, one of the first of its kind in the city, been around for 70 years probably. And we're working with them right now to build up their facility to be a resilience hub. Right now it operates as a community center. Yeah, it's awesome. It operates as a community center. It's already a trusted place in the neighborhood. It's on one of our core economic corridors. There's a food shelter in the basement. There's a theater. There's a whole bunch of workforce development, job training, all sorts of stuff in there. And what we're trying to do with it is, how do we utilize this trusted physical space to then provide an opportunity to work at that nexus of community resilience, emergency management, preparedness, climate change mitigation, social equity, et cetera. And, you know, basically what makes it a resilience hub are a couple of things. One, the process by which we get there. This is actually a community-led process. I describe my role as Chief Resilience Officer in the city as the tip of the resilience spear, but that spear is built up by everybody surrounding us, right? And so they came forward and said, hey, we want a resilience hub.
Beautiful.
All right, how do we do that? So right now we're mobilizing resources and putting together partnerships to meet the needs that have been expressed. There's an $11 million gap that we're about halfway filling with different sources, federal, state, local, as well as philanthropic. And so having community lead it, we're really just setting this package up, and I'm going to hand it off to community to take it across the finish line, because again, this work is about advancing their sense of self-agency and self-governance. And then once this is all set up, the city will lease some space, and we're not going to run it and operate it. A community will.
Amen.
We're going to support it. And so that's just one tangible example of how we're leveraging the moment to do something concrete that, again, is at the nexus of that community resilience, that trust building, emergency preparedness, and ultimately enhancing quality of life as a result.
That is awesome. And I'm going to try to put together several questions into one big ball of a question for you also. Okay, so we've heard from the scientists yet again that they were right, and we have really got to deal with this. We're going to get shock after shock after shock after shock. We've now heard from the economists and the SEC being like, yeah, the scientists are right. We actually need to think about this in a different way. So corporations, what are you going to do around resilience and really thinking about your role in this? We have the federal government betting big with infrastructure and bringing in billions and billions of dollars into communities. And so all of these things are coming together, and you're having the community shocks actually resulting in what seems like momentum towards building resilient communities. How do we bring all of these things together in a way where we don't screw this up again, because we're still basing some of this on systems that that have kind of got us where we are. So what are we excited about with all of this kind of these different drivers that are pushing us forward? But then what are we worried about in these systems that might, not get us as far as we want to go? So that's a lot of different things that you can pick and choose from. But I want to thank the audience for all of these great questions that are coming in. So who wants to start?
Go first. I love the fact that resilience is being talked about in all these spaces, and people are trying to wrap their minds around it, because that gives us an opportunity to meet that interest with some information and some next steps. I think we've done a really good job of articulating what resilience is, and that five-headed horseman that I talked about earlier has done a really good job of teaching us why we need to invest in resilience. And now the next step, I think that's incumbent upon all of us, is, okay, then how do we do it? How do we break down these steps into tangible actions that people can take? You brought up corporations, and recently, I shouldn't say recently, but the past, 10 years, they've really emphasized ESG, right? SD goals, et cetera. And I really appreciate ESG, but I predict that at some point it's going to be like ESGR, right? Resilience is going to be its own thing because of how their corporations are impacted, how the employees are impacted, how the customers are impacted. And they're going to have to come up with a plan, because, I was down in Houston about a month ago, talking to some folks at one of the corporations down there, and they were saying that it costs Houston per storm about every day that the power is out in the city because of a storm, costs the city over $1 billion. And for every storm, every hurricane that hits that city, it costs over 150 billion with a B to recover. Now, corporations are going to want to go there because of that impact. Potential employees, recruits, et cetera, that work at those companies are going to go there, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of planning around, okay, how do we build resilience at scale? Because it's really impacting economies, and it's really impacting our ability to do business. I think that's a good thing that provides us an opening then to give people the how, like I said. Someone in the comments wrote about, how we prepare our communities for climate migration, right? And now we get to talk about resilience, not just in economic development, but we could talk about it in terms of land use, right? Like how do we plan our cities differently to accommodate more growth? In Minneapolis, we got rid of single family zoning, right? Before, the city was over 75% zoned for single family, which meant that we can only accommodate growth until about 10 to 15% of the city. We got rid of that designation, which now allows for us to build more density. And over time, I'm advocating, and others as well are saying, can we build housing that also has bigger rooms? Can we change our occupancy limits so that immigrant families who have multiple generations in them can actually, live in one place, right? I mean, we're coming up with all these different land use models so that we can start to accommodate that. So I guess to answer your question, if we can just, as these things are impacted, we can tie a string amongst them, right? And say, everything is connected here. We can actually build resilience by just identifying where these connections are. And then, for us as practitioners, making it plain what each of these sectors and actors can do to actually take action and contribute to that adaptive capacity.
Stephanie, what are you excited about with all these drivers and all, the billions of dollars coming into infrastructure? What are you worried about?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have to be prepared for answering that a little bit differently. Well, sincerely, what I'm excited about is the fact that to the way you framed this, we now have across sectors more unified understanding of the sense of urgency and impacting communities at the local level in a way that could be more sustainable or resilient, and hopefully with a better quality of life as an outcome. And, prior to looking at infrastructure bills or, conversations with SEC, that wasn't felt as so much as a unified approach. So we have a long way to go, but it's starting to make that look a little bit more tangible. What I'm worried about is that, it's a mad race. It's a mad race to go after infrastructure dollars to, keep continuing with the status quo of the way that we've done business at the local government level and in the private sector, and beyond for a couple of decades or more. And we have to move past that very, very quickly. So that's a tall order, but that's what I'm most worried about. There's, in prepping for tonight, going back to your earlier question, Bill, looking at how do we make sure we're not going to make the same mistakes again? I think a takeaway for me that may be relevant to everyone at an individual level is that every decision we make, we need to make it as collaboratively as we can, but as swiftly as we can. And to very quickly assign to that decision, that action, ways that it can make a better outcome from a triple bottom line perspective, from an economic perspective, and that's wealth creation, not just profit or the bottom line, but wealth creation for a supply chain or a community level for people, and to have an environmental outcome or more, and to have more equitable outcomes. And if we can just swiftly make decisions and actions, and we have that in mind as we're making those, and we're talking about those decisions collaboratively, we can each move forward and hopefully not make, continual mistakes as we move toward a more sustainable or resilient outcome.
And Naomi, close this one out. So lots of drivers happening. What are your thoughts?
I'm feeling Stephanie here, because the idea that there's these trillions in infrastructure dollars and initiatives is an extremely bright spot on the horizon, because we know that that the deferred maintenance of our infrastructure nationwide makes us more vulnerable to more profound interruptions. And so the idea that we are embracing a way to in advance at scale is a breath of fresh air. But at the same time, again, to Stephanie's point, the idea that corporations and those in government and other practices are accustomed to, the way things work around here. And to say that you are going to be able to shape an emergency response using market-based approaches is absurd. And so corporations are designed for the market, for a market approach. So how are we actually going to shift? What are legislators going to do? It's like all across the country, we have extreme variety in what our cities do with waste. You have some cities that say there is no single-use plastic, get over it. And then there's no single-use plastic. And it wasn't, the idea that we operate into the system, that the infrastructure that's there, that's how we're going to operate. If legislators are not bold and simply make the decisions, okay, we're no longer going to do X, like many cities and universities are decarbonizing, right? They're divesting of fossil fuels. It's like, maybe we can stop subsidizing, Standard Oil. You think there's an idea whose time has come. But the idea that there's got to be someone with guts who's going to interrupt the way that the market works, because the market is not going to interrupt itself. And so I'm really also concerned about the labor unions across America. With all of this money coming down, there's always a dogfight about, okay, how do other people get a fair share? How are African Americans going to, there's enough infrastructure work for a person to work 50 years and retire with a gold watch, like Grandpa used to do. But if the labor unions are going to insist on 99% of the resources and the contracts, and if the labor unions are not going to allow a fair a process to take place for admitting people into their ranks, we're destined to widen the health wealth gap. This money coming down could be a balm for the soul for many marginalized communities. What are we going to do to make that opportunity more available to other than the usual suspects?
Yeah, I totally agree, because we have these entrenched systems that we really need to reflect on so that we don't, do this again and circle back around and make things even worse in the systems that are here. So we're going to do one more closing round for you all. And I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. So as we close out from this conversation, what's one of your takeaways, but also, what are you excited about that you're working on right now? And then I've got a follow-up question around that as well. So another multi-parter, apologies. Resilience is a hard path, because we're dealing with systemic trauma and shock and like putting the pieces together and building something new. How do you all stay personally resilient? What are tips that you would provide others in these challenging times? So that will help us like bring it on home and close it out. I'll give you guys some time, and I want to just thank our sponsors really quick: the Ed Kaplan Family Institute for Tech Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Illinois Tech, and then our anonymous donor who helped underwrite the event. So thank you all, and there will be follow-ups for panelists, but let's bring it home. So who wants to start with this one?
Well, I'll start. People who know me know that I work around the clock, and I am always tearing from one meeting or one committee to the other, and eating, sleeping, those basic fundamentals of life, they don't come by me easy. But I have a team here at Blacks in Green, and we are a family here. We're loving each other, and we are looking out for each other, and we are looking to share the good news about what we can do together for each other. So I've got people who, make me green smoothies, make me therapeutic tea, make my doctor's appointments. It's like I've got a little network that really helps me to take care of myself, and God love them, because I ain't getting any younger, but I am just, I'm on a mission. So I got to do it.
Stephanie,
I love my team.
Stephanie, what are your final thoughts for the night? What are you excited about, and what advice do you have for folks to stay resilient?
Well, in our work, our team is very excited to just be one part of the overall Oak Park, Illinois journey with climate action and with sustainability. And I'm sure that many of the audience members and those of us on the panel have been a part of or have watched this community really step forward over the decades to talk about progressive issues that may pertain to the triple bottom line view, if you will. So we've been able to work collaboratively with the village toward looking at climate action in a way that's accessible and that really focuses on not only historically marginalized populations in the community, but presently marginalized populations in the community. And so the next few months, we will have the opportunity to try and make accessible actions that can be taken quickly, both by the village and community members. Personally, every decision that I have time to make collaboratively and think about triple bottom line outcomes in my own life, I do. So I've been hopeful to be that person that Naomi just outlined, to have the guts to, speak up about the way that a schedule needs to go, or that we need to give each other grace so that I can take transit and others can take transit, and not rely on a personal vehicle to get me there a minute early, or in other ways, try to advocate for personal resilience with that platform or baseline of sustainability. So I'll just leave it at that, since there's so much more we could say. Over to Ron.
Ron, bring it home for us.
In addition to the resilience hub concept that I talked about earlier, this will be the city's first one, and we're looking at it as a pilot. It's my vision to have a network of resilience hubs around the city, so that in the event of the next disruption, it can serve as a pressure release valve in a way for city staff, because we know that we've been building resilience all around the city. We can now focus our efforts on the areas that may not have a hub serving the neighborhoods, or may not have as many community connections facilitated, right? So I'm really excited about that. Generally, I'm excited because we as advocates in cities and in partnership with other folks, we really have an opening, an opportunity really to advance principles that actually improve people's lives and also prepare for the future. We have an opportunity to actually and finally reconcile with our nation's greatest sins. And we have an opportunity to also save the planet by, future-proofing this nation, one city at a time. And so those are things that really get me excited. What keeps me going and how I kind of sustain myself. One, being in conversations like this reminds me that I'm not by myself in this work. As much as it may be deprioritized in other spaces, there are so many resilience practitioners like the folks who are listening and the folks on the panel that are really kicking ass and advancing this work in your own fields and in your own communities. And that really helps me be able to relax. The second piece is my dad always tells me, you can't fill up other people's cups if your cup is empty. And he's like, you're trying to fill a lot of people's cups. So that means that your cup has to be pretty darn full at the same time. And so I try to also invest back and make sure that, that my cup is filled by not focusing on all that plagues this place, but all the good things about it and wanting to expand those good things so that more people can experience that. But rest is part of the process, not a deviation from it. So.
Right.
All right. Well, with all of that wise words, this is amazing. I can't thank you enough, Stephanie, Ron, and Naomi, for a great discussion this evening. And, please follow up with us. We'll be following up with all the attendees as well. I want to do another shout out to Adulting Emerging Leaders for coordinating this Green Soapbox tonight. And also to Patrick Murphy, who was running everything that you didn't see as the night went on and even beforehand. So thank you all and have a great night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.